Good fun. We will have good fun.
The way he's going, he's behaving like a coward.
Formula One has seen plenty of rivalries, but none quite like this. Two legends, one track.
Very confident that we have the best two drivers in the world.
It was Senna's last race for McLaren. It was the last time either of them would be on a podium.
And a rivalry so fierce, they were willing to crash at 180 miles per hour just to prove a point.
Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing.
Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost didn't just race against each other, they waged war. It was brutal, personal, and downright dangerous. This is the story of how two men, fueled by pride and obsession, redefined what it means to compete. Senna and Prost's rivalry wasn't just about winning, it was about survival. Welcome to F1's most dangerous rivalry. But how did this turn into one of the fiercest rivalries in F1? At one point, we had two of the greatest drivers on the grid, and then suddenly, it was an all-out war for the top spot. Senna was this fearless, emotional driver who attacked every lap like his last. I mean, how do you drop to 14th and still win the race? That's Senna for you. Meanwhile, Prost was the cool, calculated professor, always playing the long game, focusing on strategy over speed. Their contrasting styles were bound to collide, and when they did, it was explosive. But before all this, they were just two guys who loved F1. He was all about being smooth, calculated, and precise. His racing style wasn't flashy, but made it deadly. He wasn't out there trying to lead every lap. Oh no, Prost was thinking long-term. He'd wait for the right moment to strike, playing the point game to perfection. Then you've got Senna. This guy was the complete opposite of Prost. Senna was raw, emotional, and fearless behind the wheel. He raced like every lap was life or death, and honestly, sometimes it felt like it was. He didn't just want to win, he needed to win. Whether rain or shine, Senna would push his car and himself to the limit. The guy was electric, and well, I think we can attribute his attitude to the fact that he won the South American Kart Championship in 1977 and was the runner-up in the 1979 and 1980 Karting World Championships. You could see that in every race, he put his life into it. Now, at first, there was respect. Prost saw how talented Senna was, and Senna knew that Prost was the guy to beat if he wanted to be the best. But here's the thing. When you've got two guys with the same goal, it doesn't take long before things start heating up, especially when their styles are this different, and this brought about tension. You could see it when they started battling on track, pushing each other to the edge. Senna would pull off these crazy overtakes, and Prost would counter with that methodical, chess-like approach to his racing. It wasn't full-on war yet, but the seeds of their rivalry were being planted. And let's not forget their first real clashes on the track. They had a few skirmishes early on, and those little moments where you just knew something bigger was brewing. Like when they were fighting for position, and you could tell neither wanted to give an inch. That was the start of one of the most iconic and dangerous rivalries in F1 history. The respect between Senna and Prost was slowly unraveling, and the seeds of rivalry were firmly planted. But what happens when you take two of the greatest drivers in the world, stick them in the fastest car on the grid, and tell them they both needed to win? Well, that's when things go from tense to downright hostile. Welcome to 1988, the year McLaren dominated the track, and when Senna and Prost's relationship completely fell apart.
28-year-old Senna has been testing a new engine, which his team, McLaren International, plan to use next season.
McLaren had the best car on the grid, and both Senna and Prost were driving it. The MP44 was an absolute beast, winning 15 of the 16 races that season. But while McLaren was dominating Formula One, the real battle wasn't with other teams. It was happening inside the team garage. At first, you might think having two of the best drivers in the world on the same team would be a dream. But for Senna and Prost, it was more like a nightmare. Prost was used to being the top dog at McLaren, and suddenly he had to share the spotlight with this fiery, fearless Brazilian who drove like every lap was a qualifying session. Senna's aggressive style wasn't just on the track, it seeped into everything, pushing Prost harder than before. The tension reached new heights during the 1988 season, especially as both drivers started to realize that their fiercest competition wasn't coming from Ferrari or Williams. It was sitting in the same car wearing the same uniform. Every race was a battle for supremacy, not just against the rest of the field, but against each other. And by the end of the 1988 season, tensions at McLaren were bubbling over. Alain Prost, the reigning world champion, feared something was off. He suspected that Honda, the powerhouse behind their engines, was giving Ayrton Senna an edge, and he wasn't just being paranoid. Prost's fears were confirmed in a meeting with Honda's head of R&D, Nobuhiko Kawamoto.
The most important thing is the young, willing engineers. And how can we educate those engineers? Through the Honda's culture, or through the Honda's philosophy.
Honda's engineers? Yeah, they had a clear favorite because of Senna's aggressive, fearless driving style. They loved it. Well, aside from being favored by Honda, Senna's relationship with Honda, which had started back in 1987, was a big doubt for Prost. Now, Prost was promised equality, a transparent team approach where both drivers would get fair treatment. But let's just say that wasn't the reality. Then came the infamous moment at the Portuguese Grand Prix, when Senna, in his relentless pursuit of victory, nearly shoved Prost into the pit wall at 180 miles per hour while defending his lead. Prost was livid, and rightfully so. This wasn't just hard racing, this was personal. That moment was the catalyst that turned their relationship from uneasy teammates to outright enemies. By the end of 1988, McLaren had one of the most dominant seasons in F1 history, and Senna won the championship. But at what cost? Well, the cost of maintaining a functional relationship with Prost and Senna. And from that point on, it was war, and the dynamic had shifted. And McLaren wasn't just about winning races anymore. It was about surviving the Senna-Prost rivalry. And trust me, the worst was still to come. So, if 1988 was the year Senna and Prost turned from teammates to enemies, 1989 was the year things went nuclear. The gloves came off, and this wasn't just racing anymore. This was full-on psychological warfare, and by this time, Prost had had enough of Senna's aggressive style. He felt like Senna didn't respect any unwritten rules of racing, while Senna thought Prost was just playing politics within the team. And to be honest, Prost was smart, and he knew how to navigate the politics of F1, but that only made Senna want to beat him even more. Well, the rivalry hit its boiling point in the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix.
This is the opportunity that Senna's looking for, and he's going through, out! Oh my goodness!
They both knew the championship was on the line. Prost could secure the title if he finished ahead of Senna, but Senna was not going to let that happen easily. And what did we get? Absolute chaos. Prost jumped Senna at the start and was leading into turn 1. Senna fell back and positions remained unchanged, but on lap 46, the two collided at the Suzuka chicane. Prost turned in, Senna went for the gap, and in a second, both cars were off the track. Prost stated that he did not believe he was responsible for the collision and complained that Senna's overtake was dangerous in attempting to go for a gap that was no longer there. After the collision, Prost just climbed out of his car, probably thinking, "That's it, I've won the championship." But Senna, he wasn't done. He got his car going again, rejoined the race, and crossed the finish line first, only to get disqualified for cutting the chicane. Prost was celebrating, Senna was furious, and F1 fans were just in shock. The whole thing felt more like a soap opera than a race. But this wasn't just a single incident. It was the culmination of a season full of mind games, accusations, and two men who were ready to do anything, literally anything, to beat the other. By the end of 1989, Prost took the title, but he was so done with McLaren and Senna that he left the team and went to Ferrari. The next chapter was even crazier. So, Prost may have walked away with the 1989 championship, but you didn't think Senna was just gonna let that slide, right? Nah, that collision at Suzuka was only the beginning. Senna had revenge on his mind, and what better place to settle the score than the very same track where it all went down.
And the hot news from Suzuka is that Ayrton Senna, and there he is starting from the right-hand side of the grid, and the track is dirty there, and the result is that Alain Prost is actually going to have a start advantage.
Senna was furious, thinking it was another political move to favor his rival. But rather than let that rattle him, he decided to settle things in the most Senna way possible. As soon as the lights went out, Prost got a better start. But before he could take the lead into the first corner, Senna came flying down the inside, and they collided. Both cars went spinning off into the gravel trap. It was over in seconds. The race, the championship, everything. Prost was out, and so was Senna. But since Senna had the points lead, he won the championship by default. It was pure, calculated revenge. Senna had taken Prost out in the same way he felt Prost had done to him the year before. The collision was brutal, but for Senna, it was justice served. The fallout from Suzuka in 1990 was massive. Prost was livid, accusing Senna of being reckless and dangerous. Senna, meanwhile, doubled down on his belief that the politics of F1 were against him and that he had to take matters into his own hands. It was a messy, fiery, and unforgettable moment in F1 history.
I had nothing to lose on the first corner. I want to win, and I went for a gap in inside on the first corner. Alain didn't see it and just closed the door, and we ended up touching.
And after that, well, the rivalry cooled off, as the next season would see more of a rivalry between Nigel Mansell and Senna. This period was bad for Prost, as he could not win a Grand Prix in a calendar year, which was due to his car. The Ferrari cars were not as competitive as they used to be, and this made Prost go on for a year sabbatical. And then he returned in the 1993 season. This period would see the end of the rivalry between Senna and Prost. Prost returned to the grid and eventually took home his 4th Drivers' Championship, with Senna a close second, who was driving a Ford-powered McLaren. The Prost Championship saw him signaling for retirement, and also saw Senna seeking another team, bringing an end to the famous rivalry.